If someone told me the worst moments of my life would begin with an innocent dinner plan, I would have laughed. But that's exactly how it started. An ordinary Tuesday night. No storm clouds or eerie omens, just me, deciding to surprise Jessica with a quiet evening together. She'd been acting distant, sure, but I chalked it up to stress. She'd mentioned work piling up and a few strained friendships, and I didn't press. If I'm honest, I liked solving problems for her. It made me feel useful. So, I left work early, picked up ingredients for her favorite pasta dish, and let myself into the house. As soon as I stepped in, something felt wrong. The air was too still, heavy, like I'd walked into a room where someone had just been screaming. The faint smell of her perfume lingered, but there was no sound. No TV, no music, no hum of the dishwasher she always forgot to turn off. Then I noticed it, her laptop, open, on the dining table. Jessica never left it out like that. I'm not proud of what I did next. I didn't hesitate. Something about the stillness, the oddity of her being gone but not taking her usual fortress of technology, made my stomach churn. I wasn't snooping, I told myself. I was curious. The screen lit up as I tapped the trackpad. A browser tab was open to a site I didn't recognize. Messages. Hundreds of them. They weren't from me. My chest tightened as I scanned the conversation. The name at the top was Chris. Simple. Nonchalant. A stranger. His messages were bold. Last night was unbelievable. I can't wait to see you again. You're driving me crazy. It was her responses, though, that hit me like a punch to the ribs. I wish I could leave right now. You make me feel alive again. Tonight. My head swam. This couldn't be real. I double-checked the username, Jessica's. It was her profile picture. Her words. I slammed the laptop shut, heart pounding so loudly I thought the neighbors might hear. I needed air, but my legs refused to move. Questions buzzed in my head like a swarm of angry bees. Who the hell was Chris? How long had this been going on? And why would she do this to me? The sound of a car engine broke my trance. Jessica was home. I panicked, shoving the laptop back where I'd found it, trying to act normal. She walked in, her usual confident stride, carrying a bag of groceries like nothing was wrong. "Hey," she said casually, glancing at me. "You're home early." I forced a smile. Thought I'd make dinner. Her face lit up with that same smile I used to believe was just for me. But now it felt fake, rehearsed, like a mask she'd perfected. I watched her move around the kitchen, chatting about her day while my brain replayed every message from Chris. She didn't know I knew, and I wasn't sure how long I could keep it that way. The pasta simmered on the stove, and Jessica flitted around the kitchen, setting plates like nothing had happened. Her voice was calm, casual, even cheerful as she asked me about my day. Every word she said felt like a tiny needle pricking my skin, and I couldn't shake the image of those messages. I should have said something right then, ripped the bandage off and demanded answers. But instead I played along. "Work was fine," I mumbled, avoiding her gaze. "Figured I'd surprise you tonight." She smiled, that same smile that used to make me feel like I'd won the lottery. Now it just made me feel sick. Dinner was a slow-motion car crash. I pushed food around my plate while Jessica talked about a new client at work, a dinner her boss wanted to organize, and how she needed a new dress for the occasion. Every word sounded like a lie, a flimsy cover for something darker. I nodded in all the right places, pretending to listen while my mind screamed, "Say something. Ask her who Chris is." But I didn't. I was too much of a coward. Later that night, after Jessica went to bed, I sat in the living room with my phone in hand. My thumbs hovered over the screen, debating whether to dig deeper into her life or let it go. Maybe it was a misunderstanding. Maybe Chris was just a friend. Maybe no. That wasn't how she talked to friends. I stared at her laptop on the dining table, now closed. Like a locked door I didn't have the courage to open again. Instead, I went to bed, lying stiffly beside her while she scrolled through her phone, the faint glow illuminating her face. The next day, I tried to push it all aside, telling myself I'd confront her when I felt ready. But fate had other plans. It was Friday afternoon, and I was stuck in the office, pretending to care about spreadsheets while my thoughts raced. Around 3 p.m., I decided to call Jessica. Maybe hearing her voice would calm me down. Help me figure out how to approach her. I dialed her number. The phone barely rang before it was answered, but not by her. I froze. I wasn't hearing Jessica's voice. I was hearing a ringtone. The same ringtone, faint but unmistakable, coming from somewhere nearby. My head snapped up, scanning the office in confusion. Then I saw it. A table in the corner, near the break room. A phone, buzzing and lighting up with my name on the screen. And next to it, Jessica. She was sitting there, laughing softly, her head tilted toward someone sitting across from her. A man. Chris. I didn't need to ask. I knew it was him. Jessica's back was to me, so she didn't see me standing there, frozen, the phone still pressed to my ear. Chris leaned closer, his hand brushing hers across the table. I didn't think. I acted. Jessica. I called out, my voice sharper than I intended. She flinched, turning around so quickly she nearly knocked her coffee over. Her face drained of color when she saw me, and for the first time in years, I saw something in her eyes I didn't recognize. Panic. Oh, hey, she stammered, forcing a smile. What are you doing here? My jaw clenched. Funny. I was about to ask you the same thing. Chris shifted uncomfortably, glancing between us. He had the decency to look nervous, but it didn't stop me from glaring at him like he was a cockroach under my shoe. Jessica stood up, smoothing her skirt as if that would make everything normal. This is my colleague Chris, she said, her voice high-pitched and unnatural. We were just... Save it, I snapped. My voice was louder than I intended, and a few people nearby turned to look. I didn't care. Jessica's face hardened, her panic giving way to irritation. What's your problem, Derek? It's just coffee. Just coffee. I couldn't help but laugh. A cold, humorless sound that didn't feel like mine. Yeah? Funny how just coffee looks a lot like flirting. Chris shifted again, looking like he wanted to melt into the floor. Jessica shot him a glare before turning back to me, her expression icy. You're being ridiculous, she hissed, grabbing her phone from the table. Let's talk about this at home. But I wasn't done. Not by a long shot. No, let's talk about it now, I said, my voice steady despite the rage boiling inside me. Or should I ask Chris about last night? You know, the unbelievable one. Her eyes widened for a split second before narrowing into slits. You went through my messages? She hissed, her tone dripping with venom. I wish I didn't have to. I shot back. The office had gone silent. Every pair of eyes was on us now, but I didn't care. I wasn't letting her slither out of this. Jessica's lips curled into a smirk. Cold, calculating, and infuriating. Fine, she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. Let's talk about it. But don't forget, Derek, you're the one who turned this into a scene. She grabbed her bag and stormed out, leaving me standing there, staring at the man who'd just blown up my life. Chris didn't say a word. He didn't have to. His guilty expression told me everything I needed to know. I followed her, my mind spinning, my hands trembling. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The car ride home was silent. Jessica drove, gripping the wheel so tightly her knuckles turned white. While I stared out the window, my jaw clenched so hard it hurt. My chest felt like a pressure cooker about to explode, but I forced myself to stay calm. Not here. Not in public. When we pulled into the driveway, Jessica killed the engine and sat there for a moment, not looking at me. Then she got out, slamming the door without a word. I followed her inside, where she tossed her bag onto the couch and spun around, arms crossed. Okay, she snapped, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. Let's hear it. What's the big accusation this time? Don't do that, I said, my voice low and dangerous. Don't act like I'm crazy. I saw the messages, Jessica. I saw how you were with him. Her eyes narrowed. You mean the messages you had no right to read? Is that what we're basing this little meltdown on? You're seriously trying to make me the bad guy? I barked, finally letting my anger out. Don't you dare twist this around. I know what I saw, Jessica. Last night was unbelievable. You make me feel alive again? Do you think I'm stupid? She threw up her hands, letting out a bitter laugh. Oh, please. You don't know the first thing about what's been going on with me, Derek. You've been so wrapped up in your own world. You didn't even notice I've been miserable for months. My stomach churned. Miserable? Miserable enough to cheat on me? She flinched, her mouth opening and closing as if searching for the right words. It wasn't like that, she finally said, her tone softer but no less infuriating. Then tell me what it was like. I shot back, because from where I'm standing, it looks a hell of a lot like betrayal. Jessica sighed, rubbing her temples as if this was just an inconvenience she had to endure. He's just someone I can talk to, okay? Someone who listens to me, who makes me feel appreciated. Appreciated, I repeated, my voice rising. You think I don't appreciate you? I've been bending over backward for this marriage, Jessica. Cooking for you, supporting you, putting up with your late nights and your secrets. And this is how you repay me. Her eyes flashed, and she took a step closer, her tone icy. You're not perfect either, Derek. You're always working, always distracted. Half the time, it feels like I'm living with a ghost. So yeah, maybe I found someone who actually makes me feel alive. Is that such a crime? I stared at her, stunned. The audacity of her words hit me like a punch to the gut. You're really trying to justify this? I asked, my voice trembling with disbelief. Maybe I wouldn't have had to if you'd paid more attention to me. She shot back, her voice rising to match mine. I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. So this is my fault now? You're unbelievable, Jessica. She glared at me, her lips pressed into a thin line. You want the truth? Fine. Yes, I've been seeing Chris. And you know what? For the first time in months, I actually feel happy. So excuse me if I don't feel like apologizing for that. Her words hit me like a sledgehammer. I staggered back, struggling to catch my breath. Happy, I repeated, my voice breaking. You think this is happiness? Lying, sneaking around, destroying the trust we built. Does that feel good to you? She didn't answer. Instead, she crossed her arms and looked away, her jaw tight. Something inside me snapped. You know what? I'm done. I'm done making excuses for you. Done pretending this is something we can fix. If Chris makes you so damn happy, go be with him. Jessica's head whipped around, her eyes blazing. Oh, don't act like you're the victim here. You've been checked out of this marriage for years. I just had the guts to do something about it. Guts, I repeated, incredulous. You think cheating takes guts? No, Jessica. Takes cowardice. Takes selfishness. And if you think that makes you brave, then maybe you're not the woman I thought you were. For a moment, we just stood there, the air between us crackling with tension. Then Jessica grabbed her bag and stormed toward the door. Fine, she said coldly. If that's how you feel, maybe I will go. The door slammed behind her, leaving me alone in the deafening silence. I sank onto the couch, my head in my hands, the weight of everything crashing down on me. The love of my life, the person I thought I knew better than anyone, had just walked out, and for the first time, I wasn't sure I wanted her to come back. The silence after Jessica left wasn't just emptiness. It was loud. Every creak of the house, every passing car, every tick of the clock felt like a taunt. A reminder that everything I thought I knew about my life was a lie. I sat there for what felt like hours, replaying the confrontation over and over in my head. Her words echoed, cutting deeper with every repetition. I actually feel happy. You've been checked out for years. Maybe I will go. Eventually, the anger started to boil over again, this time mixing with the humiliation. I wasn't just a husband betrayed. I was the fool who hadn't seen it coming. The guy who cooked her dinners while she was out with Chris. The guy who still tried to believe her excuses, even when the evidence was screaming in his face. I needed answers. My hands shook as I grabbed my phone and opened Jessica's laptop. It was still logged in. The messages were still there. Part of me felt sick, like I was crossing some invisible line, but another part of me didn't care. Jessica had already smashed every boundary we'd set. Chris wasn't just someone from work. The messages went back months. Dates, hotels, meetings that lined up perfectly with her work dinners and late nights at the office. I scrolled through them, each one a dagger to the heart. But it wasn't just the details of their affair that gutted me. It was the way she talked about me. I don't know how much longer I can do this, one message read. He's so boring. All he talks about is work. Another, Derek doesn't get it. He never will. But with you, everything feels right. My chest tightened as I read the words she'd never dared to say to my face. She didn't just cheat. She'd rewritten our entire relationship in her head, turning me into some distant, uninvolved caricature. By the time I reached the latest messages, my hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the phone. Chris, so when are you telling him? Jessica, soon. I just need to figure out how to make it. Not a disaster. A disaster. She didn't even have the decency to own up to it before I found out. I slammed the laptop shut, breathing hard. My blood felt like it was boiling, and for the first time I didn't care about keeping my cool. She wanted a disaster? Fine, let's make it one. I grabbed my keys and drove. I didn't know where I was going at first, just that I couldn't sit there anymore, drowning in her lies. But as the city blurred past, my anger found a target. Chris. It wasn't hard to figure out where he'd be. Jessica had dropped enough breadcrumbs in her messages to lead me straight to him. A trendy downtown bar, the kind of place she always said I hated because it was too loud and crowded. I parked and walked in, my heart pounding so loudly it drowned out the music. It didn't take long to spot him, sitting at the bar with a drink in hand, laughing with some friends. He looked exactly like I'd imagined. Smug, polished, the kind of guy who wore his shirt a little too tight to show off his gym membership. I didn't hesitate. Chris, I said, my voice low but firm. He turned, confusion flickering across his face before it was replaced by something else. Recognition. Do I know you? He asked, though his tone said he already did. You don't know me, I said, stepping closer. But you know my wife. The color drained from his face. His friends exchanged awkward glances, one of them mumbling something about giving us space before they scattered. Chris stood, holding up his hands like I was a wild animal about to attack. Look, man, I snapped, cutting him off. Don't you dare try to explain. I've seen the messages. I know what's been going on. And trust me, the last thing I want right now is an apology. He swallowed hard, his bravado crumbling. I didn't mean for it to get this far, he muttered. She told me, what? I interrupted. That I'm boring? That I don't appreciate her? That you make her feel alive? He blinked, stunned, as if I'd just read his mind. I didn't mean to. Didn't mean to what? I snapped. Destroy a marriage? Wreck someone's life? You think that just happens by accident? Chris looked away, his shoulders slumping. For a moment, I thought he might actually feel bad. But then he said the one thing I wasn't ready to hear. She's not happy, man. Maybe you should have seen that before this happened. I stared at him, my fists clenching so hard my nails dug into my palms. Every fiber of my being wanted to hit him, to make him feel even a fraction of the pain I was feeling. But I didn't. Instead, I took a step back and gave him a look that I hoped would haunt him for the rest of his life. You don't get to tell me what I should have seen, I said quietly. You're not part of this marriage. You're just the parasite that ruined it. I turned and walked out, leaving him standing there, pale and shaken. The ride home was a blur. By the time I pulled into the driveway, the adrenaline had worn off, leaving only a hollow ache in its place. Jessica's car was back in the driveway. She was waiting. This time, there would be no holding back. Jessica was sitting at the dining table when I walked in, her arms crossed, her posture rigid. She changed out of her work clothes, now wearing an old sweatshirt she used to call her comfy armor. It was almost laughable, like she thought a softer look might defuse the storm that was about to break. Derek, she started, her voice measured. We need to talk. No, I said flatly, kicking the door shut behind me. We needed to talk months ago. Now we're past that. Her face hardened, and she leaned back, her eyes narrowing. You can't just walk out like that and expect me to sit here waiting for you to explode. Do you even realize how ridiculous you looked back there? I blinked, stunned at the sheer audacity of her words. I looked ridiculous? You're unbelievable, Jessica. You're the one sneaking around with Chris. And somehow, you've managed to convince yourself that this is my fault. She rolled her eyes, the dismissive gesture igniting the simmering anger I'd been holding back. God, Derek, it's not that simple. You act like I woke up one day and decided to ruin your life. Do you even hear yourself? I stepped closer, lowering my voice, the fury sharp and cold now. Oh, I've been hearing plenty. Like the things you've been telling Chris. He doesn't get it. He's so boring. Do those sound simple to you? Her mouth opened, but no words came out. For once, she looked caught off guard. But the flicker of vulnerability was gone as quickly as it appeared, replaced by a steely glare. You want me to apologize? She snapped. Fine. I'm sorry. I'm sorry I found someone who actually listens to me, who makes me feel like I matter. I'm sorry I didn't stay quiet and miserable while you buried yourself in work and forgot I existed. My chest tightened, but I refused to let her see how much her words hurt. That's the narrative you're going with, huh? The poor, neglected wife who had no choice but to cheat? Do you even hear yourself? It's the truth, she fired back, slamming her hands on the table. You haven't cared about me in years, Derek. You just go through the motions, doing the bare minimum to keep this marriage afloat. Meanwhile, I'm drowning, and you don't even notice. Don't you dare, I growled, my voice trembling with barely restrained rage. Don't you dare act like this is my fault. I wasn't the one sneaking around, lying, sending messages about how unbelievable last night was. That was you, Jessica. You made that choice. She stood, her face flushed with anger. And maybe I did because I needed something, Derek. Something you couldn't give me. The words hung in the air like a slap. For a moment, neither of us spoke. I finally broke the silence, my voice quiet but firm. You know what? You're right. I couldn't give you what you needed because what you needed wasn't me. It was someone to stroke your ego, to make you feel like the center of the universe. And if Chris is that guy, then congratulations. You found your perfect match. Her eyes flashed with anger, but there was something else there too. Shame. Guilt. It flickered for a moment before she buried it under a mask of defiance. You think you're so perfect, Derek, she said, her voice trembling. But you're not. You never were. Neither were you, I shot back. But at least I had the decency to keep my vows. She recoiled as if I'd slapped her, and for a brief, fleeting moment, I saw the cracks in her armor. But she recovered quickly, crossing her arms and turning away. I'm done with this, she muttered. If you want to leave, leave. I won't stop you. I stared at her, the woman I'd once thought I'd spend the rest of my life with, and realized something I hadn't allowed myself to admit until now. She wasn't the woman I fell in love with anymore. Maybe she never was. Don't worry, I said quietly, my voice steadier than I felt. I'm done too. I turned and walked out, ignoring the way my chest ached with every step. This time, it wasn't just the door behind me that was closing. It was an entire chapter of my life. And as much as it hurt, I knew it was the only way forward. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in my car, parked a block away from our house. Her house now, I supposed, staring at the dashboard as if it held answers. The numbness I'd felt after leaving Jessica had started to wear off, replaced by a deep, gnawing ache that settled in my chest. I wasn't just angry anymore. I was mourning. Mourning the life I thought we had, the future I thought we'd build together. Mourning the woman I'd believed Jessica was. Around 3 a.m., I drove to my brother Mike's house. He opened the door in sweatpants, his hair sticking up in all directions, squinting at me like I was a stray dog. Derek? What the hell, man? It's the middle of the night. I need a place to crash, I said, my voice hoarse. Mike's face softened as he stepped aside to let me in. Trouble with Jessica? He asked, though the answer was written all over my face. You could say that, I muttered, dropping onto his couch. He didn't push for details, just handed me a blanket and let me stew in silence. That was Mike. He'd let you come to him when you were ready, no judgment, no pressure. By morning, the reality of what had happened started to sink in. Jessica and I were over. There was no fixing this. Even if she begged, even if she swore Chris meant nothing, the trust was gone. Shattered. I called a lawyer first thing, a no-nonsense woman named Lauren who came highly recommended. She listened patiently as I explained the situation, her tone professional but empathetic. So, to clarify, she said, there's no prenup? No, I admitted, kicking myself for not thinking ahead when we got married. And do you own the house together? Yes, I said, But I'm the one who's been paying the mortgage. Lauren nodded, jotting down notes. Understood. Given the circumstances, we'll aim for an equitable division of assets. But it's possible she'll fight for the house or spousal support, depending on her financial situation. She can have the damn house, I said bitterly. I don't want it. Lauren gave me a sympathetic look. I get it, Derek. But don't make emotional decisions right now. Let's take this one step at a time. The rest of the day was a blur of paperwork and phone calls, each one driving the finality of the situation deeper into my bones. By evening, I was back at Mike's, staring at my phone as it buzzed with a message from Jessica. We need to talk. I ignored it. She tried again the next day, and the day after that. Each time her tone shifted, first demanding, then pleading, then angry. You can't just walk away like this. We have unfinished business, Derek. Be an adult and talk to me. If you're not going to answer, I'll come to you. That last one got my attention. I didn't want Jessica barging into Mike's house, dragging her mess into the one sanctuary I had left. So, reluctantly, I agreed to meet her. We chose a neutral location, a park near downtown, quiet and mostly empty. Jessica was already there when I arrived, sitting on a bench with her arms folded tightly across her chest. She looked tired, like she hadn't slept much either, but any sympathy I might have felt was buried under a mountain of resentment. Thanks for coming, she said, her voice clipped. What do you want, Jessica? I asked, not bothering to sit down. She sighed, running a hand through her hair. Look, I know things got out of hand the other night. I just think we owe it to ourselves to have a real conversation. No yelling, no accusations. Just honesty. I laughed bitterly. Honesty? That's rich, coming from you. She flinched but didn't back down. I know I messed up, Derek. I know I hurt you. But don't pretend you didn't play a part in this too. Don't you dare, I said, my voice low and dangerous. Don't you dare try to make this about me. You cheated, Jessica. You lied. That's on you. Her eyes filled with tears, but I wasn't moved. Not anymore. I didn't plan for this to happen, she said, her voice trembling. I didn't mean to hurt you. But you did, I snapped. And you didn't stop even when you knew it was wrong. You made a choice, Jessica. Own it. She wiped her eyes, her expression hardening. Fine. I made a choice. But you made choices too, Derek. You chose to put work first. You chose to ignore me when I needed you. You chose to let this marriage fall apart. I stared at her, a hollow laugh escaping my lips. You really believe that, don't you? That this is my fault. That you had no choice but to cheat because I wasn't good enough for you. Well, guess what, Jessica? You're right about one thing. I'm done pretending this can be fixed. Her face crumpled, and for a moment, I thought she might beg. But instead, she stood, her voice sharp and cold. Fine. If that's how you feel, then let's make it official. But don't think for a second this is all on me. I didn't respond. I didn't trust myself to speak without breaking. Instead, I turned and walked away, leaving her standing alone in the park. This time, I didn't look back. Walking away from Jessica in that park should have felt like closure, like ripping the final page out of a book I was done reading. But as I drove back to Mike's, the weight of everything clung to me like a storm cloud I couldn't shake. The guilt crept in despite everything. Was she right? Had I ignored her? Focused too much on work? Missed the signs of her unhappiness? The questions buzzed like a swarm of gnats, impossible to swat away. But then the anger would resurface, a volcanic eruption drowning out the guilt. She cheated. She lied. Whatever shortcomings I had as a husband, I didn't deserve this. When I got back to Mike's, he was sitting in the living room with 2 beers on the coffee table. Figured you might need one, he said, gesturing for me to sit. I sank into the couch, taking a long sip before setting the bottle down. She's unbelievable, I muttered. She actually tried to blame me for everything, like I forced her to cheat. Mike raised an eyebrow. You think she believes that? Or is it just an excuse so she doesn't have to face herself? Probably both, I said, rubbing my temples. She's so convinced she's the victim. It's like she doesn't even realize how much she's destroyed. Mike leaned back, studying me for a moment. You gonna let her keep messing with your head? Or are you ready to focus on what's next? I sighed, slumping further into the couch. I don't even know what's next, Mike. A divorce, sure. But after that, it's like, I don't even recognize my life anymore. He nodded, his expression thoughtful. That's the thing about betrayal, man. It wrecks everything. But maybe it's a chance to rebuild. Start fresh. I didn't respond. The idea of starting fresh sounded exhausting, like trying to rebuild a house from rubble while still standing in the wreckage. The next day, I got a call from Lauren, my lawyer. I've been in touch with Jessica's attorney, she said. She's not contesting the divorce, which is good. But there's something else you need to know. I gripped the phone tighter. What is it? Lauren hesitated, and the pause made my stomach drop. Jessica's lawyer mentioned that she's planning to move in with Chris once the divorce is finalized. The words hit me like a freight train. Move in? With him? It wasn't just an affair anymore. It was a new chapter of her life, one she was building on the ashes of ours. Thanks for letting me know, I said tightly, hanging up before Lauren could say more. I paced Mike's living room, the walls feeling like they were closing in. She was moving in with him, starting over, like I was some obstacle she'd finally cleared. I couldn't let her have the last word. That evening, I logged into social media for the first time in weeks. My profile was still filled with old photos of Jessica and me, smiling at the beach, celebrating anniversaries, posing at her cousin's wedding. All lies now. I deleted every picture, every post, every trace of her. Then I did something I never thought I'd do. Posted. It wasn't petty or vindictive, just simple and honest. Sometimes the people you trust most will hurt you in ways you never thought possible. But betrayal doesn't define you, it reveals them. Here's to moving forward. I didn't tag her, didn't name names, but I knew she'd see it. Within an hour, my phone buzzed. A text from Jessica. Really, Derek? Airing our dirty laundry online? I expected better from you. I stared at the message, my emotions swirling. Anger, sadness, a strange sense of triumph. But instead of replying, I deleted her contact. For the first time in weeks, I felt a sliver of peace. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about me, figuring out how to rebuild my life on my terms. And if that meant leaving her behind, so be it. Let her have Chris. Let her move on. I was finally starting to. The days after my post felt surreal, like I was learning to walk again after a long fall. Jessica didn't reach out again, and for that, I was grateful. The silence wasn't just a void, it was a reprieve. A chance to think clearly without her voice, her excuses, her presence clouding everything. Mike and I started going for runs in the mornings. I hated it at first. My legs burned, my lungs felt like they were going to explode, but it was better than sitting around with my thoughts. You're faster than I thought, Mike said one day, grinning as I sprinted ahead. Anger really is the best motivation. I laughed, for what felt like the first time in weeks. He wasn't wrong, but it wasn't just anger driving me anymore. It was something quieter, steadier, determination. Jessica and I had our first mediation session the following week. Sitting across from her at the lawyer's office was strange. She looked different, her usual confidence replaced by something guarded, almost nervous. I wondered if she was starting to feel the weight of her decisions. Lauren handled most of the talking, outlining our terms with a calm efficiency I was grateful for. Jessica agreed to let me keep the car and my retirement account. She wanted the house, as I expected, but I didn't fight her on it. Let her keep it. Every room was haunted by memories I didn't want anymore. When it was over, Jessica lingered in the parking lot as I walked to my car. Derek, she called, her voice softer than I'd heard in months. I turned, keeping my expression neutral. What is it? Her lips parted like she wanted to say something important, but all that came out was, I'm sorry. For a moment, I just stared at her, waiting for the anger to bubble up, but it didn't. Instead, there was a strange sense of calm, like I'd finally stepped off the roller coaster she'd kept me on. I know, I said simply. She nodded, looking down at her hands. I hope you find what you're looking for. I will, I said, meaning every word. Then I got in my car and drove away. The finalization of the divorce felt anticlimactic, a series of signatures that marked the end of a marriage but not the end of the pain. That would take longer. But something about the clean break felt freeing, like cutting away a rotten limb to save the rest of the body. I moved into a small apartment on the other side of town. It wasn't much, but it was mine. A space free of memories, free of Jessica, free of the man I used to be. Slowly, I started to rebuild. I picked up hobbies I'd let go of: guitar, hiking, even sketching. I went out with Mike and his friends, letting myself laugh and talk without feeling like I was putting on a mask. One night, Mike brought up Jessica over beers. "You think she'll stay with Chris?" he asked. I shrugged. "Doesn't matter. She made her choice and I made mine. Whatever happens to them isn't my problem anymore." Mike grinned. "Now that sounds like a guy who's moving on." I smiled, and for once it didn't feel forced. Months later, I found myself back at the same park where Jessica and I had fought. It was different now, brighter somehow. The air felt lighter, the trees greener. I sat on a bench and watched a group of kids play tag, their laughter ringing out across the grass. I thought about everything that had happened: the betrayal, the heartbreak, the anger. It still hurt sometimes, but the pain wasn't sharp anymore. It was a dull ache, a reminder of what I'd been through and how far I'd come. As I sat there, a thought crossed my mind, unbidden but clear. I'm going to be okay. And for the first time in a long time, I believed it.